Hi, everybody. I absolutely love what today's guest has to say. He's the author of an award-winning article called Global Madness, What Must Happen to Unite? And I think the reason this is so important right now, because we're bursting at the seams. I think people just can't take the pressure anymore. And he has a really unique view on what this means to not only us, but to the mentally ill who live among us. So let's go to Dr. Fred Moss. Thank you so much for taking time on a Sunday. I know you're super busy to be with us.
Oh,
And
it's a pleasure. Thank you.
congratulations on that article. That,
Yeah, it was really great. I wrote the article. It was, a lot of thought and energy went into it, but I absolutely didn't expect to win any awards. And so on, the idea that I won the editor's choice for the Conference for Global Transformation was really a thrill. It was in the Lowe's where they give away the Academy Awards. So there was 1,100 people there in the same exact room where the Academy Awards are given. And it's like, and the winner is Fred Moss. I was like, wow, thank you. So it was really and of course it turns out to be a pretty powerful article, and in some ways predicting the future as it was written before the world went into this new stage of managing life.
Let me ask you this really quickly before we go into it. Would you have written the article any differently today than you would have a couple of years ago
That's
after COVID?
just a fabulous question, and I think that we're still at the same space. It's not that different. When I've read the article before I sent it to you, I read it again, and the pertinence hasn't shifted very much. And the whole idea really even talked about the possibility of a pandemic not being enough. It actually talks about it in the article of an epidemic or a pandemic not being enough to unify the world, and that maybe I don't even want to tip over the punchline here, but that maybe it would take even extra special invasion of some sort to put 7.8 people together, 7.8 billion people together in the same pathway.
Well, how prescient was that? I mean, you absolutely nailed it. It
Yeah,
only made us more divided. In fact, when you think something like that would bring us together, it made us even more divided.
exactly.
And I mean, that's kind of the sorrow of the times. But first of all, before we get further into the article on this madness, this global madness, what what is your personal view? I mean, you really have a radical commitment to changing the way mental illness is handled and seen on this planet. Just give us a little background on you and why this is so critical and why you're such a warrior.
Yeah, sure. I don't know about being a warrior, but I suppose so. Basically, I started into the world of mental health a little bit more than 40 years ago officially, and that was after dropping out of college and determining that I was never going to go back to college. I came home and told my mom that's it. It was the second time I had dropped out, and I was never going to do college. And she said I should get a job. So she got me an application, and I started working in a state hospital for children, for adolescent children. And really what I saw there was I began to use what I already knew were the healing tools of connection, communication, and conversation, even creativity, people being with people, listening really authentically and radically to what people are and who they're being as a way of managing all, all, like all, dis-ease. And when I saw the way doctors were managing this particular condition inside of the hospital setting, which was we would call them and we would have a complaint about a child, and then they would order some medicine and we would hold the kids down and somehow give them those medicines. There was something that was so atrocious about that that it had me finally galvanized enough to go back to school with the sole intent of becoming a psychiatrist and bringing communication, connection, and creativity into that form of thinking. So that's what I did. Now, the funny thing, Meredith, and maybe not that funny, is while I was in medical school is when this particular drug that I'm sure our viewers have heard about before, called Prozac, was introduced. And biological psychiatry got its birth while I was in medical school. So I eventually ended up being the actual, like, I have medicated tens of thousands of people, even though what I really came in to do was do the opposite of that. So over the last several years, that's how that's gone. And now I've gotten to the point in the last 15 years or so of really getting what I've already known, which is that communication, connection, and creativity are truly at the source of all healing, and that medications and diagnoses really are designed to perpetuate the conditions they're marketed to treat. So because of that, I really have been able to ease myself out a little bit of the conventional narrative and begin to see people for who they are. Like really begin, and if I had to say anything, it's almost like there is no inherent I know that I want this to be heard properly. There is no inherent definition of what mental illness is. And so there's the possibility of being with each and every person, like being with each and every person, as if what they have to say is what they have to say from where they're saying it, and respecting it for that, and then getting that they are not mentally ill, they are human. And that's really the essence of the Welcome to Humanity brand that I now run.
I love it. Okay, so we backtrack a little bit. You got in an argument with your partner and you started looking at what is the nature of why we do this division, why them and us. And then it goes on from there. So set that part up before we go into the bulk that really caught my attention of this article, where you became not only intrigued, you admit in the article, as many people won't do, but actually secretly feel, that you have a certain kind of envy for the people that we see singing and dancing and homeless in the street. And
Thank
there's
you.
a reason for that. So let's talk about, you got in a little argument, and how did that spawn this amazing article?
So I haven't spoken about that argument publicly, but it's kind of funny. It's basically what happened is that Alexandra, my present wife, and I love Alexandra to the very end of the earth, which we were not married at the time, and um, we had gotten to some spat in the morning, and I just kind of, was growling, and then I went into the bedroom and took out a little notepad and just started writing. And I just wrote this article, Global Madness. Probably all the nuts and bolts of it, maybe 93% of it, was written on this in the next hour or two. And, it really was just coming from sort of the guts of, like, when I get upset or when we get upset, there's something very raw that ends up getting exposed at that time. And so there I was, just kind of rawly dealing with the world that was as it was occurring to me. And there was an opportunity to just really write what's going on in this world. And maybe it was predictive. Of course, it turned out to be almost deeply unfortunate in its predictive capacity. But what we really got to was this idea that, okay, let's look at the people outdoors who are called ill. Let's look at the people outdoors who are called, homeless, or called like defective or afflicted or mentally deficient. What's really going on over there? And what's really going on over there is that they're generally a lot freer to be self-expressed without the rules and regulations that we have when we walk through life. We are very restrained and very constrained, and we think there's only a certain way to be, and if we're not that, we might have to get dropped off into institutions or something like that. So we're always totally afraid of that. But if you're already starting from a space where those rules, there's nowhere to fall down from, there's an opportunity to just be really genuine and really authentic. And that level of authentic genuineness is enviable. It just is. And there was, I really got that there's some deep pleasure in just being able to scream if you want to scream, or cry if you want to cry, or laugh if you want to laugh, and simply walk through life with open-ended capacity to express what's on one's mind.
Beautifully stated. And you talked about how you would walk by them in your little suit and your little tie, with your keys on you, making sure nobody takes your stuff, right?
Yeah, right.
And this button down, protected way of living. And in you personally understanding, because you've dealt with people who've been homeless, who've been labeled mentally ill for decades now. How did you feel in contrast to them on a feeling level?
How did I feel in contrast to the people I've been dealing with over the last 30 years, you're saying? Yes?
No, more the recent, when you were talking about being in your suit and tie with your keys and passing people on the street that were homeless. How did that make you feel? I mean, the observation you've already shared. How did you feel?
Well, that's really interesting. So, one of the things the other day we were out in front of a residence home. I suppose it was like transient home. Like people were there and they were sitting out on the porch and smoking cigarettes and sitting in the couches in a 2-story building. And one of the things I really got, and I always got Meredith, is I'm just like 1/4 inch from being that. I'm like, I not only am I 1/4 inch there, because of my envy for that crowd. I actually have lived in that crowd. I have been homeless before. I did collect food stamps. Did live in homeless shelters for a bit when I was coming out of, when I dropped out of college, and not so long after that in the Oakland, California area. So there's a very warm space in my heart for these people being my friends, my brothers, my pals, my family. And and there's in some ways, because of the authenticity that arises from that population, there's like, maybe I could actually just go do that again. I mean, it's like the opportunity that I have been, so civilized and then given a very high degree from a really supreme university, Northwestern University in Chicago, Illinois, and then had a really, a practice that allowed me to meet and see 40,000 people over the next 40 years is all well and good. But the truth is, we are all so close to being like each other that in a minute, as soon as we're ostracized, as soon as we're kicked off the island, as soon as our views are no longer accepted, the possibility of living in the streets or living afflicted or affected or different than the norm becomes there for all of us. And in fact, we're challenged with that right now. The idea that soon, if the other side wins, whatever that other side is, then it's real possible that we'll be considered ostracizable and then be relegated to living a secondary life or something like just be random, just being the same person. Yeah.
Exactly. And it's happening in the media all the time, making a point to create division among people. And as you say, we're at a very vulnerable point in history where so many people have been thrown off kilter because of isolation, because of losing their jobs and maybe losing your home or your apartment once the subsidies ended and all that. This is not the theoretical anymore. This is facing millions more people globally than ever has in the past.
Right.
And what are you seeing by way of, for example, your own practice, your own meeting with people? Are you seeing in mass a little bit more of a kind of coming unglued, unhinged from what we've called normal and reality?
Well, just because you threw in that last clause, I will say yes. But if you wouldn't have thrown in that last clause, I wouldn't have. Because what we see as normal and reality is simply a construct. It's simply a conversational construct. We don't have a very good definition. We never have had a very good definition of either normal or reality. So the truth is, without those definitions, it's kind of ludicrous. It's pretty self-righteous, in fact, to consider that we have an idea what abnormal is. So are people falling apart at the seams? There's a number of people who were living in the illusion of being successful in a particular reality who are no longer able to live in that reality. Those people are falling apart at the seams. There are also a number of people who are galvanizing themselves. This is a group that it's undeniable, a group of people who would call the last year and a half the best year and a half that they've ever had. A whole group of people like that has never been this good, and that they're galvanizing. Maybe they're losing family members, either really for real or in ideological concerns, or maybe they're losing or changing friends. But there's a fostering of some sort of groundedness in a group of people. So there's a counterbalancing force of people who are really finding themselves ultimately in the urgency of what's going on in the present vulnerability.
I love the way you stated that. That is so true in my own observation as well, looking around me and, well, I think even with myself to a large extent. But let's look at this notion of normal versus not normal when people, when we're confronted with someone who is maybe ranting or singing or dancing in the middle of the day in the street next to a tent that they've quickly constructed or off their sleeping bag. And the feeling in us where we can actually become ruffled and even resentful. Yeah. So let's talk about where that resentment in us is coming from, in this whole notion of the trade-offs.
Wow. Well, that's a really thoughtful question. I appreciate it. And really, when the question is, if you could, would you dance in the streets next to a tent that you reconstructed in order to live there? I know for me, when like tomorrow, in fact, I'm going, unfortunately, to visit a friend of mine who's in the hospital. It's maybe not unfortunate. I'm really looking forward to seeing him. And on the way down there, which is a 7-hour drive, the consideration was, no kidding, that we would bring our tent and stay in a tent. Because that's what we're going to do. Because why wouldn't we do that? It sounds absolutely
Yeah.
glorious.
Yeah.
So staying in a tent in and of itself is not inherently something that represents like abnormality or malfunctioning.
Well,
So
not for the millions of campers around the world and
that's right.
backpackers.
That's right, exactly. And if I could, on the moments that I feel like dancing, singing, or ranting, I wish I could do that. I wish I could go out and actually scream from the mountains the things that bother me. I wish that I really could dance in the streets when I'm feeling the ecstasy of what it means to be alive in a miracle. There's a self-expression there that is actually extraordinary. Now, you look at the other thing which you're just saying, which is the interface between us who are living in the illusion of self-protection and really the illusion of some degree of safety and security, that feel that when walking by those who don't have all the things that we think they should wish they had, that we're a danger to them, that we're not strong enough to protect ourselves, that we can't have a conversation, that the chasm is so deep that we're going to be like, that our safety is going to be challenged. And I know that feeling, especially if I'm wearing a really nice suit, especially if I'm wearing shiny shoes, especially if I drove my nice car. There's something like, oh, and maybe in fact, when you think about it, Meredith, maybe there's a piece of this that has me be sort of ashamed or blaming myself for pretending to have a life that's very much different than this other life, and for, sort of like flaunting it and knowing that if we were them, we would be mad at us.
Right. I really felt the power in what you were saying about you wish you could go to the mountaintop and either rage or sing. I think people listening to that could all feel that inside themselves. The repression, the political correctness, the inability to even speak your point of view anymore without literally being attacked maybe by a family member or cast into them. Right. This is everywhere. It's like a bifurcated reality, bifurcated consciousness, and us and them.
Right.
And so, yeah. And so one of the things you spoke about in the article, and you said, now this is far out and outrageous, but just think about it, is what would it take to unite human beings who are essentially far more similar than dissimilar? If you strip everything away beyond DNA, we're far more similar. And what would it take? So what did you come up with and why?
All right. Well, if you're going to ask me directly, then I'll flip the switch on this one. So what I came up with was the idea that if the actual Earth itself was threatened, and and more than global warming and more than a pandemic, I'm saying like fully threatened, like here comes a meteor, or maybe even more in particular with respect to the article, a Martian invasion that we were aware of, that we knew was coming, that it was the end of the Earth if we didn't unite. Like, could it be that if all 7.8 billion of us and the entire globe was truly challenged by a Martian invasion that we were made aware of, for which we all agreed was indeed coming, would we be able to work together? Would we be able to bring our forces together? Wouldn't it be that if, in other words, it's almost like the what is that? The winning, the game theory. Game theory.
Okay.
Yeah. Like in this case, it's like, would we be able to drop our differences and actually work for saving the Earth? Because if we didn't, the Earth would end. What would we do if both teams would lose if we didn't galvanize? And that was really the question. And I really, as I came up in the article, the idea of, wow, can you imagine 7.8 billion people being on the same page, actually pointing in the same directions? Pity those Martians, because we take them out.
We're powerful if that would ever happen. In the reality, you're right. Global climate change and a pandemic didn't change that whatsoever. It only seemed to divide us further. And
Exactly.
it's funny you should say that. When I was reading the article, I was remembering a comment that was made, you can find it on YouTube, by Ronald Reagan, about it was going to take an alien threat to
Hmm.
bring humanity together. Well, that's when he was looking for money for the strategic defense, what is it? Defense Initiative for
Yeah, yeah.
SDI.
SEI. Yeah.
So it was politically motivated, but that's the exact analogy he used. I hope you're enjoying this video, because if you are, there are dozens more like it on my site, all supported by people like you. So if you'd like to keep this work rolling in and join our community, just click on the Patreon button at reginameredith.com. That also gives you access to insider commentary, my live book club, and other live events with special guests. So join in. Thanks. You came to the conclusion that even under such a threat, it was unlikely that we would come
Hmm.
together. Why?
Well, I wasn't necessarily that I was concluded that, but even as tears well up when you say it now, you can only hope so. You can only hope that something like that could be enough to bring us together. It's possible that it wouldn't. And, it's like, wow, humanity, it's more important to be separated and to be right than it is to actually keep us whole. It's just outstanding. It's an outstanding sociological phenomenon.
It really is. Recently, I watched an after school SKOOL YouTube video, the ones that do that wonderful animation and
Uh-huh.
storytelling, beautiful storytelling, called Mass Psychosis.
Hmm.
And the punchline to it was that the systems in place are going to go their direction, and we really can't, we as humans can't really stop them. But what we can do, which speaks to what you're doing, is we can create parallel societies, one in which we recognize each other and we help one another. Let the institutions and markets do what they want, but where we as human beings come and create this parallel structure. Let's talk about the notion of that and what you're doing with your work to help create that.
Well, when we're looking at parallel structures, thank you for asking this great question. When we're looking at parallel structures, this is one of the things. Another article that I wrote that I'll be able to provide if you're interested is and this one for the same conference actually this last year, which didn't win the best award, but it was still a great article. It was how do we know what we know? And in that article, what we really looked at was we're pretty good at being able to respect, like, can we agree to disagree? There are some topics we agree to disagree on, and we feel self righteous about our ability to do so. Then there are some topics where somebody else is saying something, and we actually know that they're wrong. I mean, we actually know that they're completely lost, but we're giving them the smile as if they should know that we actually respect the way they think, when in reality, we don't respect at all what they think, but we're pretending to respect what they think. But we already know, we almost even feel sorry for them because they still feel whatever they feel. And it's so different than what we feel that we're pretty sure that they're wrong. And we already have kind of disrespected them as someone on parallel with us. It's like, it's too bad that they're deficient in their way of thinking. We actually all carry that. But then there's the next group. And the next group is the ones who, like, when people, like the stuff I really know that I know, there's stuff that I really know that I know, and if you actually think something different than me about that, I'll just disregard you entirely. In fact, I will disregard everything about you, like all things, how you manage everything, what you eat, who you are with your kids, where you live, what you do for a living, all of like if you can believe that, I have zero respect for any of
Total
your personality.
rejection.
Total rejection. Now, when we look at the parallel, and this is the challenge of the Welcome to Humanity brand, and the challenge really of all of humanity, which is it possible to be in the same space with someone with completely adversarial, totally juxtaposed positions, like totally juxtaposed position on a particular topic, and still be able to share some degree of human, not even some degree, like like a proper degree of human respect for that divine being over there. Even, by the way, those people. Like the ones you're already thinking of, well, yeah, everyone but those guys. No, them too. Can you put them? No, really, like even those. The ones you know that are just terribly wrong, those too. Can we do that? And that's really the question on the line. And that's what my whole life is now committed to, at least exploring. What else am I going to do, Meredith?
So let's talk about the secret to that. So you're sitting with someone. How would you, as a professional who has made this his life's passion, begin creating that kind of cooperative and creative, compassionate relationship with someone who is totally your opposite, philosophically and otherwise? How would you do that? This is a little primer for us to work with, and
Right.
taking this on as a personal challenge even.
Right. So I don't have an easy answer for that. The truth is, the triggers are here with me. I do not have this entirely figured out. And there are people on this planet that I just simply absolutely have complete and total disrespect for. That's me. I'm a human. I totally get it.
We all do. Yeah.
It's just the way it is. I don't want to see them, and I don't really care if I ever even hear anything they have to say ever again. That's just human. But what can I do with that? I can recognize that that's my impulse with that particular person. And there really is a person there who has given everything they have about how they got to be whoever they got to be, is walking through the world with whatever they have to say about whatever they have to say, even if it's absolutely 100% diametrically opposed to what it is that I think about anything. Can I be adult enough? Can I be divine enough? Can I be man enough? Can I be human enough to actually respect that as being just another challenge in my life, to take on loving, respecting, honoring, accepting, forgiving, all those high vibrational possibilities? Can I do that? And if I don't do it, can I bring myself back to challenging myself again to doing it anyways? Here's my theory, Meredith, that if I'm able to do that with that person, that is my only shot ever of the possibility of creating that possibility for that person to do it with me and everyone else. If I can actually model that in their presence, then maybe, just maybe, the likelihood or the possibility of being able to interact with somebody using that as a premise will leak over there to them, and perhaps leave a possibility that they too can accept me and people who think diametrically opposed to them.
What about this element too? The notion that you question and dig deeply enough till you can find sort of a common human theme in both of you, and then maybe build and explore from there, even
That's
if it
great.
does become a little contentious.
Right. No, that's great. And the truth is, we don't have to build too far. You see, we're both breathing from the same fish tank. That's
Yeah.
all we have to really get. Yeah, we have kids and parents. Every one of us, we have parents. Every child, every person on earth had parents. At least I think so. I mean, I'm pretty sure. And so there are commonalities. Each one of us breathes. Each one of us sees, or sees even with our eyes or whatever we're seeing. If we happen to be blind or what in the dark, there are things that are common. We think, we carry on. We carry on with others. We eat. There are things like could we break bread? That there are some really beautiful examples in time of adversarials. I was in Jerusalem not so long ago, sitting on the steps one Saturday morning. It's just Shabbat in Jerusalem, and it was really one of the more astonishing moments of my life, as I saw there was hundreds of people from multiple different nationalities who were peacefully managing each other while their cultures were actually at war with each other like 6 miles away. Like, it was like, well, look at this. It was, and in fact, if I have to say so, and I've never really noticed before, I think it was that experience that actually inspired the Global Madness article.
I love it. Okay, so welcome to humanity. Let's talk about the way in which you're trying to transform how we view mental illness, and then maybe give us a couple of examples from other countries such as Norway, Australia, Israel, where they're managing this in a little more progressive way.
Well, so, one of the ways, I think we've already talked about it, one of the ways that we're really looking at transforming the narrative of mental illness is this idea that we don't really know what mental illness is, we really don't. Now, for our listeners and our viewers, I have to underline this because it's so important. Some people might think that I'm diminishing the pain and suffering, the misery that they might be experiencing with life. And I absolutely, positively am not diminishing or calling that anything less than exactly that. It is that, it is at least that, and it can be really destructive and overwhelming. It's very real. It's part of humanity, and it's real. And yours in any given time might be way worse than somebody else's, or way more difficult. So this is not diminishing any of that. But what we can really get is that by transforming the narrative and getting that that's humanity, I start off like I'm looking at you actually across the screen, eye to eye, rather than in the power gradient of like me with something that you wish you had, like a power gradient of doctor patient or something like that. We start going with, no, I meet you as a human. We are both humans. So me and the homeless dude coming out of the tent and me and the guy with the $10 million home in Beverly Hills are just the same. There's no one less normal or more normal than the three of us. And we really begin there. And in transforming that narrative, in exploring the possibility that all that's happening in this life of ours is humanity, that's it, and that we share that common essence, the possibility of starting from there and listening to what's being said, what's being told, what's the story. I have seen so many people who once they are heard for what it is that matters to them, their whole life changes. I worked in some prisons. I worked in Folsom State, and I worked in Pelican Bay. And these people are I'm talking about the prisoners, are the most non-pretentious people in the world. They're just straight up. They are just straight up incredibly beautiful in my way of thinking. And what's here is to be with them, be with anyone really, without all the noise that I have that you're less than or more than or scarier or all that, and really just just shoot for it anyways, to be on even keel with them. So that's the essence of transforming the narrative, is by really taking away the notion that illness or that mental illness is an inherent entity. Now, you mentioned other countries, and Global Madness, the documentary that was put somewhat to a halt with the COVID outbreak, it was geared towards going to multiple different countries. I used to think that I would be the Anthony Bourdain of mental illness, and I would go to each and every country and explore different ways that mental illness had been established and how had it been defined and how was it being treated. You mentioned a few different places, in I think it's Rwanda, it might be Zimbabwe, I forgot, I'm sorry. What they do is there was an orange picnic bench that a grandma would sit on, and so an elder woman would sit on, one who had been a grandmother. And when someone was having some kind of troubles, they would go and sit with her and talk with her. And that's all they would have to do, and they would walk away cured, period. They would just walk away, and whatever was troubling them was gone. And that was the function. That was the mental illness treatment of this particular community. They don't have psychiatrists. And frankly, psychiatrists and medication don't actually really cure very many illnesses anyways. They're not even intended to cure. They're intended to slow down the deterioration, and they barely do that. But cure isn't what we're after in the mental illness world in America.
So would you say that sitting with the elder woman was because she had the heart and the ear to hear them?
That's exactly right. I guess I didn't make that clear, but yes, that's exactly right. They got gotten. She would ask them the questions. She would be with them. She would hear what it was that mattered to them, what it was that was imbalanced, it was unbalanced, what it was that was affecting them, and they would walk away anew. They would walk away renewed.
Oh, Fred, that is so powerful. Because in reality, I've said this before, my husband started picking it up. I said, everyone's talking, but no one's listening.
Exactly.
Our world is such that everyone is projecting and talking and just screaming to be heard. Well,
Exactly.
the other person is just waiting for them to finish up so they can say what they want to say. And the
Exactly.
whole notion of listening to one another is almost a lost art, and yet, unless you go to some faraway retreat for 10 days or something.
Right. And even
It,
in those retreats, sometimes they're silent because they even shut those down so that the only person you're listening to in those situations is yourself. And
yes.
that's also true. And that's hard enough to listen to ourselves, by the way. And yeah, so there's the radical, authentic listening that could, in fact, be what's here at the source of all healing. People just want to be heard.
Absolutely.
7.8 billion people, that's what they want in
Yeah,
this
they want to
life.
be seen for who they are. They want to
Exactly.
be, they want you to accept them, that they're, whatever it is this is who I am. Is that okay?
Yeah.
It's so
Yeah. Yeah.
simple.
It is simple, right? And some of us, you and I included, we can call ourselves privileged. Indeed, we are. And there's something like, well, we have insulated ourselves by going up pathways for which there is a protective mechanism that how we became who we became has a whole community and a society that will generally take care of us being who we are. Some of those situations are not exactly true for other people. They're living in places where they're natural or where they've been determined to be outcast. And life is a lot rougher for them to move right in. And you start getting, which I got with, yesterday at the residence home, and sometimes when I walk by those tents, um, I'm only, I'm really seriously, absolutely only a half inch from being that. At any given moment, boom, 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 I wake up and that's how that's going all of a sudden. And it's like, I'm not like equipped better to manage myself or worse. It's just that's the way it is. In Australia, you had mentioned Australia. There's this thing called, I think it's on the east edge, the southeast edge of Australia. There's a man there who does surf therapy. And the people from all over Australia, New Zealand, Tasmania, they go there, and then he spends 3 days with them teaching them how to surf, and like really what it is to be on the surf, the Australian surf, and they walk away. They're absolutely cured all the
I
time.
love it. I love it. And then, of course, there's dolphin therapy, equine
Yes,
therapy. It
yes,
seems that nature and animals do have that way of bringing something out in us. Nature itself, which we're so disconnected from. At least if you're homeless, you're more connected to nature. You're getting some vitamin D. You're out there in fresh air.
exactly. No, that's really true. You start talking about nature. I've done a couple vision quests, and in the vision quest, I really got out there alone with the butterflies, the horseflies, the dragonflies, and then the bear that lived over there, or the flowers, or the logs, or the sun, or the moon, and the multiple stars. The to see the world for what it really is, rather than the myopic view of what I have now been programmed to believe is really important. I spend all my day, I'm sure you do, just staring at this screen. Like I'm staring at a pixelated screen and living in the illusion that I'm actually doing something. And in truth, all I'm really doing is sitting on my butt staring at a pixelated screen and actually talking to it. And there's something so strange about that. When in life, the earth doesn't really care about the politics or the situation. It's going to be fine. The earth's going to be fine. And there's like, when you get in touch with that, there's some beautiful resetting that can go on. You mentioned animals. I can't go very far without talking about the fact that I have 3 cats. And my cats, Desposito, Valentino, and Winston, just bring me so much joy and renewal all the time, every day, never not. Never not. I just see them. I'm like, dude, you are just hilarious. You are so on, and they just are chill all the time, and or except when they're not, and when they're not, it's kind of whether they're chasing a fly or whatever they're doing. They're just so beautiful, and seeing the world through access of animals can really be a source of joy and ecstasy.
Absolutely. Unguarded, unpretentious. Just they are what they are, just like you were speaking of when you spent time with the prisoners. completely unpretentious and unguarded in what they shared with you. And those are powerful stories.
Thank
And
you.
again, storytelling is a big part of what you're doing. And are you going to be able to pick up the filming of the documentary series?
Well, I sure hope so. You know, life goes on. There's different ways to do this. I'm now even considering doing it virtually. I picked up a team recently who's ready to restart the Global Madness series. The Global
Fabulous.
Man. It would be pretty fun to just go out there and actually connect with the same people and bring forth what we'd be doing is really more often than not, I think what we would be doing is really bringing forth the multiple definitions of this notion of mental illness. And when any one word has multiple definitions, it means that it doesn't have a singular definition. And if it doesn't have a singular definition, it turns out that it doesn't really even exist. And if it doesn't really, if it's just culturally specific, then we should know it like that. A broken arm is a broken arm in Zambia. It's a broken arm in Tokyo. It's a broken arm in Little Rock. It's a broken arm. It's what it is. It's just a broken arm. There's no place where a broken arm isn't broken. Mental illness doesn't live like that. Mental illness, even in this city, is different than what mental illness is in the neighboring city, let alone the neighboring country, let alone the neighboring continent. So we start looking at if there is no true definition of mental illness, and there is no true one because we don't even know what normal is after all, then we can start at least taking steps towards considering all of humanity as one. And maybe 7.8 billion of us can at least consider the possibility of coming together should in fact there be an attack from another planet.
Well, until then, we can at least start when we get in the next argument with somebody,
Yeah.
knowing that what you just talked about a little bit ago, every one of us just wants to be seen and felt and heard and accepted for who we are. I mean, in the end, that's what it's all about. And in the middle of a screaming match or whatever, if we just could stop for a minute and say, look, I just want you to accept me for this, that vulnerability, I think, could go a long way toward mending fences between people. I mean, yeah, it
Yeah,
could.
It could.
Any final thoughts before I thank you at the end of your conference day for taking time to do this. I know you've been really booked. Any final thoughts before we say goodbye?
Well, I just think that, what's really important is that when you're not doing it, like when you're triggered, when that person shows up in your life, maybe it's your sister-in-law, maybe it's that particular teacher or that particular, politician or that particular, when that person shows up in your circle and you're just like, man, I hate that, or I can't stand that, or I'm not going to listen, or I don't care. What's really important here is to have compassion and forgiveness for yourself. It's like when you I got what Dr. Fred's saying, but I'm not doing it here. And it's like, be okay with all that you're doing, because all of it, including having trouble with other folks, is part of being a human. This whole game that we're in called One Lifetime, or called, between now and when they bury us or whatever is going to happen at the last day, is one for which each and every experience could be embraceable. Everyone, including the ultimate painful ones and the beautiful ecstatic ones. And really noticing that being a human allows for the entire smorgasbord of all experiences, including the ones that have you naturally not accepting another person. It's okay. It's okay that they do that. I mean, we're all humans, and there's a possibility of living a life that is maybe a slight upgrade from that. And be kind to yourself, because being kind to yourself is the best way to show others that kindness is available.
Hear, hear. I've loved talking with you. Everything you say, I think, is probably sinking in on a pretty deep level with all of us here. And I love what you're doing. We're all human, welcome to humanity. I love it. And then what did you say the name of that article was? How do you know what you know?
Oh yeah. How do you know what you know? But there's a couple other things that I'll give our listeners a copy of my PDF ebook, which is The Creative Eight, Healing Through Creativity and Self-Expression. This is just an opportunity to look at art, music, dancing, singing, drama, and others as ways of managing discomfort in the world. And then there's another book that I'm coming out with. It's not quite ready, but I'm really excited about that has me be the helping people bring their voice out to the world, and that's just fun. So the article, "How do you know what you know?" I'll give that to you as well, and that'll be waiting on the front edge for any of your listeners.
Fabulous. Okay, Dr. Fred, what's your URL? Where can everyone get this stuff?
The best way to get a hold of me is getting a hold of me would be Dr. Fred at welcometohumanity.net. And if you wanted to check out my webpage, it's again going through construction, and I think it's gonna maybe even change its name, but it won't change how to find me. The Welcome to Humanity podcast is the podcast I have. I love that podcast, and we've had a number of very powerful guests, and maybe you can have you as a guest, Meredith, and sometime soon. And really, it's the welcometohumanity.net website. That's the best space to find me right now. And again, it's going through upgrade, but depending on when you hear this, that's the best way to find me.
Very good. Thank you so much, Fred, for taking the time today. I really appreciate it. And I'm sure you're going to have a lot of people pass through there and download those PDFs.
Thank you. Really appreciate it.
Just delightful.
Thank you.
Okay, you heard it. Welcome to humanity.net. You can find everything that Fred talked about there, past work and Dr. Fred's upcoming work. So until next time, thank you for joining us here on reginameredith.com.